The restaurant glowed like a jewel in the heart of New York City. It was not just any place to eat, but a grand, expensive dining hall where the rich and powerful came to show their status. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above, throwing soft golden light across polished tables set with silver cutlery and fine glassware. Soft music played in the background, and the fragrance of exotic dishes floated in the air. For most people, a dinner here would be a once-in-a-lifetime experience, but for the wealthy customers, it was just another evening. Inside, men in expensive suits and women in elegant gowns filled the seats, laughing loudly, sipping wine, and talking about business deals and luxury vacations. Their voices carried confidence, and sometimes arrogance, because they were used to being treated with respect everywhere they went. In one corner sat a well-known billionaire. He was tall, dressed in a sharp black suit, and carried himself with an air of superiority. Everyone around him seemed eager to please him, either because of his money or his influence. His table was the center of attention, not because of what he said, but because of who he was. Working quietly between these tables was a young black waitress. She moved gracefully, balancing trays, refilling glasses, and offering polite smiles even when customers ignored her. She had been working at this restaurant for almost 2 years, and though the job was tough, she did it with dignity. She knew every corner of this place, from the shiny marble floors to the grand velvet curtains. For her, this restaurant was not just a glamorous hall. It was a battlefield of patience where she had to fight silently every day to earn her living. Her uniform was neat, but simple compared to the glamorous clothes of the guests. Many times she felt invisible, as if her presence did not matter to the people she served. Some spoke to her kindly, but others treated her as if she were beneath them. Yet she kept her head high and focused on her work. Inside her, there was a quiet strength that no one could see. The billionaire watched her as she approached his table. His eyes carried the kind of arrogance that comes from years of being untouchable. He leaned back in his chair, smirking, and spoke something in Arabic to his companions. They laughed loudly, while the waitress kept walking toward them, holding the tray firmly. She did not show on her face that she understood a little of what he said, but inside her heart tightened. She had heard such tones before, words meant to belittle, meant to make someone feel small. The atmosphere in the restaurant seemed ordinary to the other guests. The music played, glasses clinked, and conversations filled the air. But at that table, a different kind of energy was building. The billionaire's friends enjoyed his jokes, unaware of how offensive they truly were. They believed no one else could understand. For them, it was harmless amusement. For the waitress, it was another test of her patience. She looked at the tablecloth, then at the plates, making sure everything was in order. She reminded herself that this was her job. She was here to serve food, not to argue, not to lose her temper. Still, a part of her wanted to respond, to remind them that she was not as simple as they thought. That moment, however, was not yet ready to come. For now, she played her role perfectly, silent but aware, calm but deeply thoughtful. Around her, the restaurant continued to shine as if it were a world far removed from real struggles. The people sitting there did not know what it meant to worry about rent, bills, or how to survive the next month. They lived in a bubble of wealth where a single dinner could cost as much as another person's monthly salary. And in that bubble, they often forgot that the people serving them had lives, dreams, and intelligence too. The billionaire tapped his fingers on the table, waiting for her to pour his drink. When she leaned closer, he whispered another line in Arabic, just loud enough for his friends to hear, and again they laughed. He thought of himself as clever, enjoying the feeling of power over someone he assumed could not understand him. But the truth was, he had no idea who he was dealing with. The night stretched on, with dishes being served and conversations flowing like wine. Yet, beneath the laughter and arrogance at that one table, a storm was slowly building. The waitress, who had always remained silent in such situations, felt something different inside her this time. She was tired of being treated as if her worth was measured only by the tray she carried. The restaurant, with all its glitter and glamour, had become the stage where something unexpected was about to happen. Though no one else in the hall noticed it yet, this evening would not be like any other. The wealthy guests thought they were in control of the night, but soon they would see that respect cannot be bought, and arrogance always meets its match. The waitress's name was Amara. She was in her mid-20s, with determined eyes that told a story of silent battles and unspoken dreams. To the casual observer, she was just another young woman working long shifts to make ends meet. But beneath the uniform and the endless tasks, she carried a depth that no one in that glittering restaurant cared to notice. Amara came from a family that knew the meaning of struggle. Her parents had worked hard all their lives, teaching her that dignity mattered more than wealth, and kindness weighed more than status. She carried those lessons into every corner of her life. Even as she served tables where people looked down on her, she held her back straight, her words polite, and her heart steady. But Amara was not ordinary. What the diners never saw was that after her late-night shifts, when most of the city was asleep, she opened her books. She studied languages with passion, memorizing words and phrases, practicing accents until they felt natural on her tongue. English was not her only skill. She had taught herself French, Spanish, and Arabic. For her, languages were like doors to new worlds, keys that unlocked respect, and shields that protected her from ignorance. Every night she worked, she tucked this secret strength deep inside her. Her co-workers knew she was smart, but even they did not know how much she had taught herself. Customers rarely cared to ask anything beyond their orders. To them, she was just the waitress. But Amara knew she was more, and she carried that knowledge like a flame, even on the hardest days. Her journey to this restaurant had not been easy. She had applied to dozens of jobs, many rejecting her outright, some not even bothering to respond. When she finally got this job, she promised herself that she would use it not only as a way to survive, but also as a place to observe. She learned to read people. By the way they treated those who served them. She learned who carried real class and who only carried money. The wealthy diners often underestimated her, thinking she was invisible. But Amara saw everything. She saw the way couples whispered over dinner, the way business partners exchanged fake smiles, and the way arrogant men laughed at their own jokes. She noticed how quickly respect disappeared when it was directed at someone they believed was less important. These observations only fueled her desire to rise above. At the same time, she remained humble. She did not see her job as shameful, but as honorable. Serving people did not make her small, it made her stronger. Every rude comment only sharpened her patience, and every careless insult only reminded her of the power of silence. Yet, she was not weak. Patience, she believed, was not the absence of strength, but the control of it. That evening, as she walked through the golden glow of the restaurant, Amara's heart carried a heavy calm. She had been mocked before. She had been ignored before. But when the billionaire's words in Arabic reached her ears, she felt something stir within. She understood every word he said. The way he ridiculed her skin, her job, and her presence in a language he assumed was foreign. It cut deep, but it also awakened her courage. Amara did not react right away. Instead, she steadied her hands and focused on her work. She reminded herself that emotions must never spill where pride waits to trap you. But behind her composed expression, her mind was racing. She remembered long nights of studying Arabic, repeating sentences into the mirror until her accent sounded native. She remembered the pride she felt when she finally read her first Arabic book without needing a translation. And now, in this moment, all those hours of effort seemed to converge into a single opportunity. Her heart told her that this was not just about her. This was about every worker who had been treated like they were invisible. This was about proving that strength and intelligence do not always wear suits or walk with bodyguards. Sometimes they wear aprons and serve dishes with a smile. As she poured the billionaire's drink, she glanced briefly at him. His smirk widened as he whispered another Arabic phrase to his friends, a cruel one, thinking she could never respond. But Amara's silence was not weakness. It was preparation. She was waiting for the right moment, the moment when her words would cut through his arrogance like glass shattering against stone. The restaurant buzzed around her, oblivious to the quiet storm building inside her. Other waiters moved between tables, chefs shouted orders in the kitchen, and guests raised their glasses in celebration. Yet for Amara, the world seemed to narrow down to one table, one arrogant man, and one decision. She adjusted the tray on her arm and breathed deeply. She knew she would not let this insult pass like the others. Tonight would be different. Tonight, her silence would break, and when it did, it would not be with anger, but with intelligence. She would answer him in his own language, not to humiliate him, but to show him that dignity has a voice that cannot be silenced. What the billionaire did not know was that the waitress he ridiculed was not just serving him food, she was about to serve him a lesson he would never forget. The moment finally arrived when Amara stepped toward the billionaire's table, balancing a tray with practiced ease. Her face was calm, her movements graceful, but inside, her thoughts were sharp as a blade. She had already heard his mocking words in Arabic earlier, and though she hadn't shown any reaction, they echoed in her mind like an unwanted song. The billionaire, confident in his untouchable power, leaned back in his chair with a glass of wine, smirking as if the entire room revolved around him. His friends surrounded him, men and women who thrived in his shadow. They laughed at his jokes, nodded at every arrogant comment, and pretended his cruelty was wit. To them, mocking a waitress was entertainment, a way to make themselves feel superior in a room where they were already seated at the highest tables. None of them noticed the patience and quiet confidence that Amara carried with her as she approached. She arrived at the table, setting down the glasses and plates with perfect balance. "Here are your drinks," she said softly, her voice polite but firm. She turned to the billionaire, her expression professional, her eyes steady. For a brief moment, their gazes locked, and he gave her a smug smile, the kind that told her he still believed she was beneath him. As she began to pour his drink, he leaned toward his companions and whispered another comment in Arabic, this time crueler than before. He mocked her job, her skin, her presence in the restaurant, thinking the foreign words would hide his poison. His friends burst into laughter, glancing at her as if she were too simple to understand. To them, it was just another joke at the expense of someone they assumed was powerless. But Amara heard every word. Her heart tightened, not from shame, but from the weight of years when people like him had tried to make her feel small. She remembered the rude customers who ignored her greetings, the ones who snapped their fingers instead of speaking, the ones who treated her like furniture instead of a human being. And now, here was a man with billions to his name, speaking with the same cruelty, hiding behind a language he thought gave him protection. Amara took a deep breath and continued her work without faltering. She placed the wine bottle back on the table, adjusted the glasses, and stepped back with her usual grace. But inside, her decision was made. She would not let this pass. She would not allow this man to walk away believing his wealth gave him the right to belittle anyone. The billionaire, pleased with himself, raised his glass and clinked it with his friends. He did not even glance at Amara, as if she were invisible now that she had served him. He believed the moment belonged to him. What he didn't know was that the story of the night was no longer his to control. As Amara moved to another table, she felt her courage building like a tide. She thought about her long nights of study, the times when she repeated Arabic phrases until her tongue shaped them perfectly. She thought about the sacrifices she had made, the exhaustion she endured just to keep chasing a better life. And now, here was the test of it all, an arrogant man handing her the chance to prove that she was far more than what he saw. She continued her duties, serving other guests, smiling politely, and never showing the storm inside her. But her mind stayed on that table. She knew the right time would come, and when it did, she would answer him in the language he thought belonged only to him. Meanwhile, the billionaire and his friends carried on with their evening, enjoying the illusion of superiority. They ordered expensive dishes, laughed at empty jokes, and filled the air with their arrogance. They had no idea that their arrogance had already planted the seed of their embarrassment. The restaurant around them carried its usual glow. Couples whispered sweetly across their plates. Business partners leaned close in serious talks, and the soft notes of music floated through the air. To everyone else, it was just another night in a grand restaurant. But to Amara, this was the night she would finally stand tall in a way she never had before. Her encounter with the billionaire was not just about words. It was about respect. It was about showing that intelligence, dignity, and courage cannot be hidden beneath a uniform. She was ready, and the stage was set. When she finally returned to his table with their next course, she carried not just plates, but a decision that would change the tone of the entire evening. The billionaire looked up at her with the same mocking smile, leaning close to whisper yet another cruel phrase in Arabic. He believed she would, once again, understand nothing. He believed she was powerless. But Amara was no longer just a waitress at that moment. She was the storm waiting to strike, the voice waiting to be heard, and the dignity waiting to rise. And with one simple act, one carefully chosen response, she was about to turn the entire room in her favor. The first encounter had been made. His insult, her silence, and the weight of what was about to follow. What began as another act of arrogance was about to become a story remembered by everyone in that glittering restaurant. Amara walked away from the billionaire's table with her tray balanced against her arm, but her mind was racing. The sting of his words still echoed inside her, sharper than the clinking of glasses or the chatter of the wealthy guests. Yet instead of breaking her, those words lit a fire in her heart. She had faced insults before, on buses, in shops, in other restaurants, but this one felt different. Perhaps it was the confidence in his voice, or the mocking laughter of his companions, or simply the way he believed she was too unimportant to ever answer back. Whatever it was, Amara knew she could not remain silent this time. Her strength had always been invisible to the people she served. They saw a waitress, nothing more. They didn't see the long nights she spent at her small desk, surrounded by books, whispering Arabic phrases to herself until she got the rhythm right. They didn't see the way she saved her tips, dollar by dollar, to buy second-hand language guides and online courses. They didn't see the determination in her eyes when she promised herself that she would never be trapped by the limits others tried to put on her. Patience had been her armor all these years. She had learned to smile when customers ignored her, "Good evening." She had learned to nod politely when someone snapped their fingers as if she were not human. She had learned to swallow her pride when people assumed her intelligence ended with the apron she wore. But deep inside, Amara carried a hidden strength, a quiet power that grew stronger every time someone underestimated her. That strength was not just about language, it was about the story of her life. She had grown up watching her parents work harder than anyone else, only to be treated as if their effort was worth less. She had promised herself that she would rise, not with anger, but with knowledge. Knowledge was her shield, her weapon, our path forward. And tonight, that strength was asking her to step forward, to use the gift she had trained herself to hold. She replayed the billionaire's Arabic words in her mind, the cruel tone he used, the laughter that followed. He believed Arabic was his secret code, a language of superiority that separated him from those he mocked. But Amara had broken through that wall long ago, one word at a time, one late night at a time. She had built her fluency brick by brick, and tonight she would use it. As she stood near the counter, waiting for the next order from the kitchen, she steadied her breathing. Her hands didn't tremble, though her heart beat like a drum inside her chest. She was not nervous. She was preparing. There is a difference between reacting out of anger and responding with strength, and Amara understood this better than anyone. She would not spit back cruel words. She would not mirror his disrespect. Instead, she would rise above it. She would answer him calmly, fluently, in the very language he thought she could never speak. Around her, the restaurant buzzed with its usual rhythm. Waiters rushed in and out of the kitchen. Plates clattered onto trays. Guests raised their glasses to toast. No one could sense the storm quietly building in one young woman's heart. To them, she was just part of the background, a moving shadow in the glow of chandeliers. But soon, all eyes would turn to her. Amara thought about the meaning of true strength. It wasn't about shouting louder than the one who insulted you. It wasn't about humiliating someone in return. True strength was standing tall without losing your dignity. It was about reminding others that respect is not earned through money or power, but through humanity, and she would make sure that her response carried this truth. The billionaire continued his evening as if nothing mattered beyond his circle of friends. He laughed, ordered more food, and dropped careless comments as though the world was his stage. But Amara's silence was not submission. It was strategy. She was waiting, not hiding. The right moment would come, and when it did, she would show everyone in that room that arrogance always meets its match. She remembered a phrase her father once told her: "The strongest voices are not always the loudest, but the ones that cannot be ignored." That phrase lived inside her as she carried her tray back toward his table. She didn't feel small anymore. She didn't feel powerless. She felt ready. Her hidden strength had always been her ability to endure, to rise quietly, to surprise those who underestimated her. And tonight, that strength was no longer going to stay hidden. It was about to step into the light. As she approached his table again, the billionaire didn't look at her with respect. He smirked, leaning toward his companions as if planning another joke. But Amara's mind was already set. She would not allow him to walk away believing his arrogance had no consequence. She would not shout, she would not break her dignity, but she would speak. And when she did, her words would not just be heard, they would be remembered. The hidden strength that had carried her through years of silence was finally ready to be revealed. And in that shining restaurant, where money thought it ruled everything, dignity was about to remind everyone who truly held the power. Amara carried the next tray of dishes toward the billionaire's table, her steps steady, her heart calm but alert. She knew the moment had arrived. This was not just another serving trip, it was the stage for the answer she had been preparing silently for years. Around her, the restaurant glowed with laughter, music, and the clinking of glasses. Yet to Amara, the sound faded into the background. Her focus narrowed only on that one table, the one that had become the center of her silent storm. The billionaire was laughing again, leaning close to his companions. His voice carried arrogance, every word dripping with the confidence of a man who believed no one could ever challenge him. As Amara placed the plates before him, he smirked and whispered another line in Arabic. This time the insult was sharper, uglier. He mocked her as if she were too uneducated to understand, too low to matter. His friends burst into laughter, glancing at her as if she were invisible, a prop in their evening's entertainment. But Amara was not invisible. She heard him, she understood him, and she was done being silent. She straightened her back, held her chin high, and with a calm, steady voice, she answered him in flawless Arabic. Her words were not cruel, not mocking, but powerful. She reminded him, in his own language, that respect should be given to every human being, no matter their job, color, or status. Her tone was measured, her accent perfect, her delivery smooth. It was not just a response, it was a revelation. The laughter at the table froze instantly. The billionaire's smirk fell away, replaced by shock. His friends stared wide-eyed, mouths half open, as if they had just witnessed the ground shift beneath them. For the first time that evening, silence fell heavy at their table. The music still played, glasses still clinked elsewhere, but here, all sound had disappeared, leaving on the weight of her words hanging in the air. Amara stood tall, her eyes calm but unflinching. She had not raised her voice, but her words carried farther than any shout could. Other guests nearby, who had caught fragments of the exchange, turned their heads, curious about what had just happened. A quiet ripple of attention began to spread across the restaurant. The billionaire opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. He was a man used to control, a man used to commanding rooms with his wealth and presence. Yet in this moment, faced with a waitress who had just spoken to him fluently in a language he thought she could never know, his arrogance crumbled. He looked around the table, hoping his companions might laugh again, but their faces were no longer amused. They looked uncomfortable, embarrassed even, because they had been part of the mockery that had just been shattered. Amara did not gloat. She did not smile triumphantly. She simply bowed her head slightly, collected the empty glasses, and turned to continue her work. Her dignity remained intact, untouched by anger or pride. That was the brilliance of her response. It was not about humiliating him, but about reclaiming her own respect. The atmosphere in the restaurant began to shift. Guests who had overheard started whispering to one another. Some smiled faintly in admiration, others nodded, as if silently applauding the courage it had taken for a young waitress to stand tall in front of one of the city's wealthiest men. In a place where money usually dictated the balance of power, a single moment of truth had rewritten the rules. For the billionaire, the turning point was undeniable. His glass shook slightly as he set it back down. His friends avoided his gaze, no longer eager to echo his arrogance. The balance at the table had shifted, not in his favor, but in hers. He had intended to use his language as a weapon, but it had been turned against him with elegance and grace. Amara continued her duties as if nothing unusual had happened, but inside, her heart beat with quiet pride. She had not only defended herself, but had also shown that strength can wear many faces. Sometimes it does not come from shouting, but from speaking calmly when no one expects it. Sometimes it does not come from power or wealth, but from knowledge carried silently until the right moment. The restaurant, though glittering and filled with wealthy guests, now carried a different energy. People glanced at her with new respect. They whispered her name, though most had never spoken to her before. She had become more than a waitress that evening. She had become a symbol of dignity. For the billionaire, the turning point was humiliation, but for Amara, it was liberation. She no longer felt invisible in that restaurant. She no longer felt powerless. Her voice had filled the room, her knowledge had silenced arrogance, and her courage had written a story no one there would ever forget. The turning point had come and gone, but its echoes remained, carried in the silence of one man and the quiet pride of one woman. And though the evening continued, everyone at that table, and many beyond it, knew the night had changed forever. The billionaire sat frozen in his chair, his fingers tightening around the stem of his glass. His smirk, the expression he wore like a crown, had slipped away completely. For years, he had been the man who controlled every room he entered, his money and status enough to silence anyone who dared oppose him. But tonight, in this shining restaurant filled with chandeliers and polished silver, he had been silenced by someone he thought was beneath him, a waitress. His companions shifted uncomfortably. Moments earlier, they had laughed with him, entertained by his cruel words in Arabic, certain that no one else could understand. Now, their laughter felt poisonous in their throats. Their eyes darted between him and Amara, unsure how to recover. The arrogance they had shared only moments ago now burned as shame. None of them wanted to be the first to speak. The silence around the billionaire's table was deafening. The background music still played, waiters still moved swiftly between tables, and other guests still spoke in hushed tones. Yet here, at this table of wealth and power, a strange stillness took over. Heads turned discreetly from nearby tables. Diners who had caught fragments of Amara's calm, fluent Arabic now stared with admiration, while others leaned closer to whisper about what they had witnessed. Amara herself remained composed. She did not stand over the billionaire, demanding an apology. She did not grin triumphantly at her small victory. She simply moved on with her duties, her back straight, her steps steady. But the quiet dignity of her response carried more weight than any heated argument ever could. She had spoken once, and that was enough. The billionaire finally cleared his throat, attempting to regain control. He forced a small laugh, pretending it was all just a misunderstanding, but his voice cracked slightly. His friends did not join in this me. They stared down at their plates, avoiding eye contact, unwilling to help him rebuild his shattered pride. For the first time in a long while, he was alone, his wealth unable to shield him from humiliation. Inside, he was seething. How could a waitress, someone he considered invisible, speak to him in his own language so flawlessly? How could she, without raising her voice, make him feel so small? Anger churned in his chest, but he could not show it. To lash out now would only deepen his embarrassment. He tried to compose himself, sipping his wine with shaky hands, but the tremor betrayed him. The shock spread beyond the table. Other guests whispered quietly, their faces lighting with admiration for Amara. Some smiled at her as she passed by, offering a silent gesture of respect. A few even began clapping lightly, a soft ripple of applause that grew as more people realized what had happened. The sound was not loud, but it was powerful. It carried across the room, reaching the ears of the billionaire and his companions, who sat stiffly in their seats. Amara did not acknowledge the applause. She did not need to. Her silence was part of her strength. She continued her work, but her presence now carried a new weight. Every step she took across the restaurant floor reminded the diners that dignity does not depend on money, and intelligence cannot be hidden forever. The billionaire's shock deepened as he watched her. For the first time, he was not the most powerful person in the room. His wealth, his arrogance, his language, all had failed him. He looked at Amara and saw not a waitress, but a woman who had dismantled his pride with a single act. The thought unsettled him. He was not used to losing, not even in such small encounters. His companions whispered among themselves, their voices low. One of them muttered that they should leave, another nodded in agreement, but the billionaire remained seated, staring into his glass. He wanted to disappear, to undo the moment, but it was too late. The damage was done. For Amara, the shock at the table was confirmation of what she had always believed, that true strength is not measured by wealth or power, but by dignity and self-control. She had not needed to raise her hand or shout to make her point. Her calmness had been her weapon, her knowledge her shield, and her courage her victory. Around the room, the whispers continued. People who had never noticed her before now watched her with new eyes. She had become more than just part of the background. In a hall built for the wealthy to display their superiority, she had displayed something far greater. The billionaire finally lowered his gaze, unable to meet hers again. His arrogance had been replaced with silence, and his silence was the loudest sound in the room. That silence was his defeat, and her triumph. The shock lingered long after the moment had passed. The diners resumed their meals, the music played on, but the atmosphere was different now. Everyone knew they had witnessed something rare, a moment where dignity defeated arrogance, where respect proved stronger than money. And at the center of it all was Amara, the waitress who had turned an insult into a lesson, and who had reminded an entire room that silence does not mean weakness. It often means waiting for the right time to speak. The silence at the billionaire's table lingered like a heavy cloud, but it could not last forever. The sound of hands coming together broke it. At first it was just one person, an older gentleman at a nearby table who had witnessed the exchange. His slow, deliberate clapping echoed softly through the golden glow of the restaurant. Heads turned toward him, curious. Then a woman across the room joined in, smiling warmly at Amara as she continued serving with calm grace. Within seconds, more diners followed, until the restaurant filled with a gentle but undeniable rhythm of applause. It was not thunderous, not like the ovations given to celebrities or performers, but it was pure and genuine. Each clap carried admiration, respect, and even a little gratitude. These people had seen arrogance crumble before dignity, and they wanted to honor the woman who had made it happen. Amara froze for the briefest moment, tray in hand, before realizing what was happening. She turned her head slightly, her eyes widening at the sight of people clapping. Not for the billionaire, not for his wealth, but for her. For the first time in this grand hall, she was no longer invisible. She did not bow, nor did she smile widely. That was not her way. Instead, she gave a small, respectful nod, her lips curving into the faintest smile, as if acknowledging their gesture, while still holding on to her quiet dignity. The applause swelled a little louder, before fading into soft murmurs and smiles. At the billionaire's table, the scene was humiliating. His companions shifted uncomfortably, their faces pale. None of them dared look at him directly. The billionaire sat rigid, his jaw clenched, his fingers drumming nervously on the tablecloth. He was a man who had always been celebrated, always applauded, but tonight the room's respect had been stolen from him by someone he considered beneath him. That applause was like a mirror, showing him not who he thought he was, but how others now saw him, small, defeated, and silent. For Amara, the applause was not about victory over him. It was about something greater. All her life, she had worked in places where she was unseen. Customers remembered the meals, the drinks, the luxury, but not the faces that served them. Tonight, the applause told her she was seen. She was valued not for carrying plates, but for carrying dignity. It was not just recognition, it was validation. She moved gracefully to another table, her tray steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. A young couple whispered, "That was incredible," as she passed. A group of business people nodded respectfully in her direction. Even the head chef, peeking out from the kitchen doors, clapped his flour-covered hands together once before retreating back inside. The applause created a ripple effect, not just in sound, but in spirit. Conversations shifted from shallow talk about deals and vacations to whispers about respect, dignity, and the courage of one young waitress. For many in the room, the night's most expensive dish, or rarest wine, was no longer the highlight of their evening. It was Amara's moment of strength. The billionaire, however, could not escape the weight of it. Every clap felt like a slap against his pride. He tried to raise his glass, pretending indifference, but his hand trembled too much. His friends muttered excuses about needing to leave early, their loyalty thinning under the glare of public shame. Wealth had always been his shield, but tonight it was useless. Not one person clapped for him. Not one person smiled at his table. All the respect in the room had shifted away, carried by the sound of applause, toward the very woman he had mocked. Amara, meanwhile, did not allow the moment to inflate her pride. She knew applause fades as quickly as it rises. What mattered was not the sound of their hands, but the silence she had broken with her voice. That moment could not be taken away from her, not even by time. Still, she felt something new blooming inside her. It was not arrogance, but empowerment. For the first time, she saw herself not just as a server of food, but as someone who could stand in the light of her own worth. The applause confirmed what she had always known, but rarely felt, that respect can be earned not through status, but through courage and dignity. As the clapping died down, the restaurant settled back into its usual rhythm. Yet, the energy had shifted. The room was warmer, more aware, more alive. Guests smiled at her as if silently thanking her for reminding them of a truth they had forgotten. The billionaire sat hunched in his chair, wishing for the evening to end. The applause was over, but the shame lingered like an aftertaste he could not wash away. He had entered the restaurant as the man everyone admired, and he would leave as the man who had been silenced by a waitress. That knowledge weighed heavily on him. Amara continued her shift, moving from table to table, her expression calm, her steps as graceful as before. But inside, she carried something different now, a quiet triumph. She had not planned for applause, she had not spoken for recognition, but she had spoken the truth, and the truth had earned her respect in the most unlikely of places. And though the night carried on with music, food, and chatter, everyone present knew they would remember this evening, not for what they ate, but for the moment when one woman stood tall, spoke with dignity, and turned ridicule into applause.